Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Trail Talk Highpointing podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and we are back for part 2 of our series with John Mitchler. And today he's going to tell us about National Park Highpoints. John, welcome back to the show.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Well, let's get right into it. Now, there are some national parks where we've all hit the high point because it's also the state high point. So I'm talking about Rainier, Guadalupe Peak, Clingman's Dome, Denali. What else am I forgetting?
Whitney, Clingman's, Guadalupe, Rainier, and Denali.
So I think the summit of Mount Whitney is technically in Sequoia. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't ever say that I've been to Sequoia National Park, even though I summited Whitney, because I didn't really experience the national park. But
that's interesting because when you go around and you visit places like what we're going to talk about, it's important to distinguish between just reaching the highest point and actually enjoying the park or the monument or wherever you're going.
You're right.
And
You're
actually
right.
seeing what it's all about.
How did you get started in reaching the highest peak in the national parks? Was this after you had already reached the 50 state high points?
Yeah, pretty much. I had 5 of them, obviously, with doing the state high points. But as you travel around, you see a lot of the country, and you start coming up with other lists to do. Mainly, while I was doing the state high points, I wanted to visit a winery in every state, so
That's
I completed that goal of 50 wineries, and I had done some of the national parks, but it wasn't really until after I helped write the guidebook to the Colorado County High Points that we were searching for another guidebook to do. And we thought, wouldn't that be cool to have a guidebook to the national park high points? There's plenty of guidebooks to national parks, but not to the high point.
You're right.
Which ones are easy, which ones are difficult, that type of thing. So I started finished the state high points in 2003, and it was the middle 2000s that I started doing national parks on purpose.
Okay. And where did you start?
Well, like I said, 5 that are state high points.
Sure.
And it was sort of random. It's wherever I could. Wherever I could travel to. I looked over some notes on my national parks tracking, and it was just scattered all over the place, going to the East Coast, going to the South, going to the any that are in the Midwest, and then the West. It was just all over the place. And the easy ones I could do on sort of like vacations, and then on some of the more difficult ones, I would partner up with friends to people that I met along the state high point journey to help get to the top of the more difficult ones.
Now, I found myself on a national park high point by accident. My husband and I went to New River Gorge National Park a couple months ago, and we went to the Riverbend Lookout, and I saw the geo survey marker, and I said, wait a minute, is this the high point of the national park? And I'm like, oh my gosh, it is. I reached the high point, but everyone who goes to that national park and does that lookout reaches that national park high point. And that got me thinking, the ones that I've already done. And I said, well, what a cool list that would be to do that one day. And then I started thinking about how complex of an endeavor that can turn into, because you have some national parks that are so vast that it's like, how do you even get out to these peaks?
Yeah, there's quite a few that are relatively easy, and then some that are moderate to reach the summits of, but the logistics of getting to them can make them difficult. For example, Channel Island out in California. It's offshore. You
Yeah.
have to you have to plan your boat ride. Very popular place. Plan your boat ride. Plan on camping overnight. I mean, I suppose you can get off the boat and try to run up it, but then that defeats the whole purpose of going to the Channel Islands.
Mm-hmm.
The hike itself is not too terribly difficult. It's a trail to the top, and it could be considered easy, moderate hike, but the logistics of getting there. And I found that quite a few of the national parks had logistical issues of getting to them and reaching just getting to the trailhead, so to speak.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. But I just wanted to go back to the Channel Islands. My husband and I got married in a little courthouse in Yuma, and then the next day we went on our honeymoon to the Channel Islands. We drove to Ventura, parked the car, got on the boat, went out to Santa Cruz Island, and I wanted to go to the high point of the island, and we found it. But as we were standing on that high point, I looked out and I'm like, that mountain over there is very obviously higher than where we are, but there's a geosurvey marker here. So I was like, what's going on there? Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, the park, the national park, is described as everything on those five Channel Islands there that comprise the park, or something like that. However, the Nature Conservancy owns part of the land that comprises, I believe that was Devil's Peak you were looking at,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
is higher than El Montaña.
Yeah.
And so it's privately owned. And even though it was defined, the park boundaries are defined as the shoreline and everything in the island, it's privately owned. So I asked the Park Service, do you count that acreage in your park acreage? And they said no.
That's
We don't
interesting.
consider it. Our rangers don't patrol it. Now the Nature Conservancy patrols it, but the park rangers don't. When I talked to them they didn't patrol it, and they don't count that acreage as part of the park acreage. So,
Okay.
you know,
I mean,
some of the hardcore would rather do it, but it's
sure. It was a beautiful high point, though, where we went on Santa Cruz Island. Where did you guys camp
yes,
out while you were there?
yeah. And we camped out really close to the dock. We just basically drug our duffels up into the campground.
Yeah, we stayed in that
Close to
lower
the
loop
dock.
campground. It was like Scorpion Cove or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Pigs were running all over the island. They may have been removed by now, but
Oh, yeah, I
there were
didn't
a
see
lot
any.
of wild pigs, feral pigs.
Wow, we just saw those little foxes. It looks like a mix between a fox and a corgi.
Oh,
Did you
yeah.
see those?
No, never saw those.
Oh my gosh.
Saw too
They
many
like
pigs.
only live on the Channel Islands
In
because there's no predators for them there. Then, if they were to come on to the rest of the states, they would never survive. They wouldn't survive a couple hours. These things are like miniature dogs.
Oh, that was
So
cool.
cute though. But yeah, after I
It's a place
reached,
I'd like to go back.
yes, same with us. And I want to go back to a different island. I want to go to Santa Rosa Island and camp on the beach there. And I also want to check out the high points of the other islands in the Channel Islands.
There you go. Island
Yeah.
bagger.
Yeah. What are some other logistical challenges that you've run into in high pointing the national parks?
A few of them have permits required. More and more are having permits required to access the backcountry. For example, Eagle Peak in Yellowstone, there's so many people that want to go into that area in the backcountry that you have to score a permit just to be
Are you
hiking down
serious? There's like a
unless you-
lottery to get into the
Yeah.
backcountry?
Oh yeah, it's pretty controlled. Most people that do Eagle Peak, because of that, come in from the east on the national forest side.
Okay.
It makes it a little bit longer I believe, and a little bit more treacherous with all the grizzly bears. So when we did it, I've approached it from both directions. When coming in from the national forest side, which seems to have more bears, we set up our 3 tents, and then I set up an electric fence around the or around the tents, where you put in the
There's
posts and
that many
string the
bears.
wire. And yeah, along the highway there, they don't allow soft-sided camping. In other words, no tents. You have to be in an RV. It's
Oh, because of the
the bears
bears.
are there. So that's something to consider. Permits are something to consider. Isle Royal in Lake Superior. That's another one where you have to really plan your boat trips to get over there and stay on the island. And it's. I know one guy who got off the boat and ran to the high point and caught the ferry at the end of the day. But
Jeez.
most of us who want to enjoy the island, would backpack or camp and catch another ferry later. So that's a logistic. It's an easy hike. It's an easy walk. It's no big mountain, but just the logistics of getting to this to that place is something else.
Now, what about some of the parks in Alaska that are so massive? How do you get to those high points?
Well,
Obviously, apart from Denali.
there's 2 or 3 that are easy, that are just walking, but they generally involve bush pilots to get you to within a spot where you can actually walk to them. But most of them are very difficult. In fact, Wrangell St. Elias, the Redoubt Volcano, Mount Igapak. I mean, these are world-class mountains that people really shouldn't attempt unless they're really, really good at stuff. I mean, they're more difficult than Denali. They're not snow-covered glaciated peaks except for the Redoubt Volcano, but they just have rock scrambling and I never got up. I tried twice. I never got up Fairweather in Glacier Bay National Park. The one time we actually landed on the mountain, we landed there and stayed at the landing zone for 9 straight days. We never even advanced our camp up.
Wow.
They just dumped us off in a plane. 9 days later, there was a weather window and we bagged out. And during that time, it snowed 13 feet.
Oh my gosh.
So at about day 6 or 7, we had to extract our tents from the holes because you keep digging around your tent, but the snow just built up. I have a great video of that. I should
Wow.
make available.
Yeah.
That whole ordeal.
Now, can we go back to the Yellowstone High Point? Can you talk about the technicalities of that? You went over the logistics and the bear obstacle. What about the actual mountain?
Well, it's pretty much a backpack in and a walk up to the base of the summit peak, and then it's a rocky climb over some very unusual terrain. You can either choose to go up. It's sort of like because it's volcanic. It's like a wedding cake of layers of 10-foot bands of rock that you have to get up and then go up another one and then go up another one. Or you can go around the side and shimmy up a hole in the rock band and get up that way. But that one it involves a lot of exposure. So there's really no good way of getting up to it. It requires some goofy rock climbing. You don't really have to be roped. Most of the people that I know that have reached the summit weren't on belay. They didn't rappel. They didn't do anything like that. But that you have to use some rock climbing to get to the summit.
Now, when you were on that mountain, did you see other people there, or was it just you and your team?
Nobody. No, it's just we'd see on some of the lower down trails, we'd see horse packs, pack horses with people out for a 2 day horse pack through the park. But that was lower down. And once we got up higher, we didn't see anybody. Once we got to Eagle Pass, certainly we didn't see anybody. It's pretty remote.
Wow.
In fact, that Eagle Peak is close to the most remote spot in the lower 48.
So how do you measure remoteness? And how was that determined?
Well, remote, when we think of the word remote, we think of solitude and being far away from people or human activity.
Mm-hmm.
The spot that I'm referring to in Yellowstone is the farthest from any road. So
Okay.
in that way, people call it remote. However, it is really close to a trail called the Thoroughfare Trail that is full of backpackers. So if you go to this remote spot, you will see people, a fair number of people. So it's not really remote like you think of, like we use the term remote. So it's
Yeah.
kind of a misnomer, but it's easy to say remote. And there's a couple that's identifying the most remote spot in all 50 states, and they're going to them. The spot that's the farthest from any roads.
Wow.
They're trying to visit that. Yeah.
That is,
There's a lot of people doing a lot of crazy things.
I like it. And, I guess I'm surprised by how many people are getting in or eager to get into the backcountry of Yellowstone. I mean, I understand the appeal. I just didn't know that people did that. And you would think that the backcountry was like the last place that you would need to enter a lottery to get into. Obviously, you need a permit because the rangers need to know who's out there and when they are expected back or whatever. But I didn't know there was a wait list to get into the backcountry of Yellowstone.
It's a beautiful place. It's a popular place. It's sort of like in Colorado, the 14ers of the mountains. A lot on all the 14ers, any given day in the summer, you'll see a lot of people. But if you go out into the eastern plains, the ranch land, and go to the highest county Highpoints out there, you won't see anybody because nobody goes there. They're all seeking the big mountains and the great scenery, and if you're looking for solitude, you go to the places that maybe aren't so pretty and aren't so popular.
Yeah. And just on the subject of permits and lotteries and stuff, I feel like I should do an episode about those because every time somebody mentions a permit, I'm like, no, we have to get into I want to know the details. But I was thinking about the lottery system and when the national park incorporates that into a trail or a mountain or even a time-stamped entry thing, that is not something that ever is going to go away. It's like permanent. I can't imagine a scenario where the national park goes, okay, we can take away this lottery system. This trail is no longer popular or as popular. Like, that's it. It's here to stay. And I was thinking about that because I was thinking about, I used to, when I would have to travel for work years ago when I was in the Army, and I would have to go to Virginia. And if I ever had a long weekend or something, I'd go to Shenandoah National Park and I would just hike up Old Rag. And on a busy weekend, there were some bottlenecks in that trail, but otherwise it was manageable. And now there's a permit system or a lottery. I don't know which one it is, but it got me thinking, like,
really,
there is, yeah. Because there's so many people from DC that come down to do that hike. It got me thinking, like, they're never going to take that away. I think whenever and I don't know this for a fact, this is just a hypothesis, but whenever the National Park Service institutes that system, I don't know that they're going to remove it, So it's like, these hikes that we do at a national park that we walk on the trail, or we just park at the trailhead and we start walking. Like, savor it, because you never know when they're going to put
Yes.
some more red tape around it.
Right. More people. They didn't need it when there were 200 million people living in the United States, but now that we're at 350, 400 million people, there's just too many people wanting to go to the same spot.
You're right. And I talk about these systems as if I'm complaining, but I do understand why they're in place. And it's the number of people that are in the country, number one, but also the number of people that want to show you where they've been by taking a picture in these popular places and putting it up on social media. And I think that can be another episode. That's just another rabbit hole I can go down into, but I don't want to do that on your show because you actually have interesting things to say. So we'll circle back around. So
Good.
we're at Yellowstone, Eagle Mountain. Then I would imagine you went down to Grand Teton.
Yes, did that fairly early. When I was climbing Rainier, I climbed it with Greg and Tom and my brother and two other guys. Greg, who lived in Jackson Hole and is a really good climber, he always looked at the Grand Teton, but he had never climbed it before. So we made an expedition and hired a guide service for Greg and Tom and I and Kurt and I to get up to the top of Grand Teton,
How was that?
which was a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
That might have been my most favorite national park high point, just because
Really?
of the people I was with, and it was climbing, and you have to rappel off the summit, but it was fun. It wasn't too difficult. It was more just pure fun.
Oh, that's awesome. One of my most memorable experiences in a national park is when I went backcountry camping in the Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado. And part of that was because I couldn't find a hotel. I was traveling for the Army, and I was just in my car, just going across country. And I couldn't find a hotel nearby, and the developed campgrounds within the park were closed. And so I said, well, I'll go backcountry camping in these sand dunes. And the ranger told me that they consider the backcountry to be anything over the tallest dune. And he said, if I can see your tent from the visitor center, you're not far enough. So I went over the tallest dune. I went so far back, and I've got to say that was one of the hardest climbs I've done in my life, because it was 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It was windy. It was dry. I was so out of breath. But anyway, so it was just me in the park that night, and the sky was so dark. I could see so many stars, and the landscape, I was in like this little valley, and all I could see was sand on either side, and then straight ahead were the mountains. Yeah. And I was just like, I don't know when I'm ever going to have this experience again. Because on one hand, you look around and you feel like you're in the Sahara Desert, and then you're reminded that you're in Colorado, and it was incredible. But now that's got me thinking, what's the high point of the Great Sand Dunes? And if it is on a sand dune, does the elevation change with the wind?
So the tallest dune, they call it the tallest dune, doesn't really change that much.
Okay.
It's pretty stable, and it's the tallest dune. So you could go into the park and go up the tallest dune. The highest dunes are up against the mountain, and their elevation is higher than the tallest dune. So you could go over, drive around and then hike around to the east and go up to the highest dunes.
Okay.
And claim that. The highest point within the park is out of the sand up along a ridge. And you stop halfway up the ridge, and that's where the park boundary is. However, the the park is called Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve, and there's a
Yes,
huge area of land that's part of the preserve up in the mountains. And if you want to do the
that's
highest
right.
point of that, you'd come in from the east and go up Tierras Peak, and that's the highest point of Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve. So
Okay.
you've got four choices there.
Well, for anyone listening, if you ever want an otherworldly experience, go backcountry camping in the Great Sand Dunes.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
Now, what about a place like White Sands? Is that a high point that might change again with wind?
No, and it's not really sand, quartz sand. It's
The
gypsum
gypsum,
crystals.
yeah.
That's what makes it white. But the features that are considered the highest point are actually formations and rock, so that won't change.
Oh,
And
okay.
that was a national monument that just recently got converted to a national park. So
That's correct. Now, my husband and I were taking our daughter to Congaree National Park because it's not that far away from us. I
yeah,
understand it's a swamp. Where's that high point? Just so I know.
it the highest point of Congaree is right at the entrance sign. So when you
Oh,
pull
okay.
off the highway into the park, at the entrance sign, that's the highest point of the park. It used to be a national monument also, and it was called Congaree Swamp National Monument. And
Oh,
when they converted it to the national park, they realized it is not a swamp. It's I think it's something else. It's a flooded floodplain or something like that. So they got rid of the word swamp and they just kept it as Congaree National Park. The cool thing
okay.
about that, see, this is another example of pulling into the park, getting your photo, claiming the highest point at the entrance sign, and then leaving. Well, the whole point of the park is that the cypress water, the cypress trees in the water, and you can take the boardwalk out among them, or better yet, rent canoes or kayaks and go out among them. And that I didn't do that. I'd like to go back and do that because you're really enjoying and seeing the park and why it's actually there to begin with, not
Yes.
just the high
Yeah.
point.
Well, we plan on doing the boardwalk and then, however we can manage a kayak with our daughter. We usually trade off activities while one of us watches her, but would
Oh
definitely
yeah,
love
yeah,
to
yeah.
do that. Let's talk about a park that is somewhat controversial. Some might say it shouldn't be a park. Gateway Arch, a high point there. Is it considered the arch if it's man made?
No, no.
Okay.
We're always looking for when the high point is the highest natural ground. Unfortunately, that urban setting has all been reworked over hundreds of years. The park and the arch down by the river is part of the national park, and so is the courthouse, which has a fabulous museum in it. And on that ground, if you go to, I think it's the southwest corner, you're at the highest ground in the park. And whether
Okay.
it's it's been reworked, so you're not standing on natural ground, but that's the highest ground. And I don't
Okay.
know, I've always thought that parks should be capturing landscape, preserving landscape, and
Yeah,
something like the arch and the associated museum should be like a historic park,
I agree.
a
Yeah.
historic site, something like that. So
Yeah. Now, what about Klingman's Dome? Like, that's a man made structure.
yeah, the structure is man-made, and you go up in it and you walk in a
Yeah.
circular pattern. Down at the base of the structure is the benchmark denoting the highest point of that park, of that
Right.
island.
I could have
So,
just turned around there.
yeah, right. You didn't have to go up the ramp. No.
No.
As a matter of fact,
7 months pregnant and I was
they
going up
now
that
have
ramp.
the Klingman's Dome. They have the Klingman's Dome benchmark down near the parking lot, so you could actually get out of the parking lot and
Oh,
see the
yeah.
benchmark if you're chasing benchmarks. But but he, but we for high points we don't necessarily just go to the benchmark. We try to go to the highest natural ground, which sometimes is not the benchmark.
Right. Right. Well, I think we were discussing in the last episode Mount Rogers.
Yes, right.
That,
There's a there's a rock and everybody goes to it. The benchmark is set in that rock. But Don Holmes wrote an article that I published in the High Pointers newsletter years ago about a rock nearby that's slightly higher. I didn't go to that rock when I did my 50 state high points, and I'd like to go back there and visit that higher rock just to see for myself. We're only talking 6 inches, but
yeah, yeah. Now, you mentioned Grand Teton being one of your most memorable national park high points. What were some other memorable ones?
I enjoyed the Lata Mountain in the National Park of American Samoa,
Oh, wow.
which is a really long flight south of Hawaii. That was kind of that again is a very logistically difficult peak to get to because you go to Hawaii and you catch the flight down to Pongo Pongo on the large island there, and then you wait for a flight over to the island of Tau so you can get onto the island that has that park's high point. Once you get there, and that's maybe like a weekly flight. So once you get there, you really ought to. There's no places to stay, so you have to communicate ahead of time with the Park Service to contact the mayor of that island to find some homestays so you can stay with people there, and then you should hire some local guys to help machete cut to the highest point. And it's a really, really long day, and most of the island people don't get up pre-dawn, so you wait for their schedule, and you pretty much will have to spend a night on the mountain, just laying along the trail, sleeping, and it's very warm, very, very humid. The nice thing about that is it's a national park, High Point, and you can claim that national park, but it's also a U.S. territory. So when I finished the 50 state high points, I also wanted to do D.C. because that's the United States of America is defined as 50 states and one federal district, and then there's 5 U.S. territories. So really, if you're going to cover your bases and visit everything, visit the high points of the 50 states, you should visit the territories as well.
Wow. That is very thorough. How did you know to call ahead and have someone contact the mayor so that they can find you a place to stay?
The Park Service does that for you. So you can call the National
Oh,
Park Service there, and they will set you up with. They'll put you in. They'll communicate with the locals on the island.
oh, okay.
When you get out in a remote setting like that, and you land on the plane, and you get out of the plane, you're just hoping that somebody's going to be there to meet you, and take you to a place. But because it's getting quite a few visitors, it may be the least visited national park, except for maybe some in Alaska. But it's not visited very much, especially on that island. But there are some, and there's a few homes that cater to visitors, tourists.
Now, did you also do the Virgin Islands High Point, as that's a national park?
Yeah, on the Virgin Islands, the national park The highest point is Bordeaux on St. John's, where the national park is.
Okay.
The highest point of the U.S. Virgin Islands is Crown Mountain, which is on St. Thomas. So when anybody goes over there, either to do a national park or to do a territory, they should do both. And then my advice is on the far east end of St. John is the National Monument, and you should get in a kayak and go out to the rock that denotes the highest point of that national monument.
Wow.
You try to do as many lists as you can on a trip.
Yeah.
Even though you may not be pursuing them, you may be pursuing them in the future.
Are there any other memorable national park high points that you want to tell us about before we move on to national monument high points?
North Palisade was fun because I did it with some friends and my brother, and we made it to the summit. It's a backpack inn. It's in California, just north of Whitney, and we made it to the summit without rope, and then climbing down, there were a couple steep pitches where we rappelled. It just was fun being out there with a team, exploring and getting up a peak like that. So
that's fun.
There's a couple other that were satisfying to do because there's been 5 national parks that have been demoted and they're no longer national parks. And I wanted to visit all 5 of those former national parks.
What were they?
And a couple years ago, I finally got up. Well, one is in Oklahoma. It used to be Chickasaw National Park, Platte National Park. It's now Chickasaw Wildlife Area.
Okay.
One is Sully's Hill up in North Dakota. One is Mackinac Island.
Oh, I love it there.
That was designated a national park in
Oh my gosh.
1875. So if you've been up to the fort on top of the island, you've pretty much been to the highest point of that
Yeah. Okay.
former national park.
Oh, Mackinac's
It
great.
was a national park before they really had a national park concept in place.
I think I also might have been to the high point of Hot Springs National Park in Arkansas. Right behind the promenade.
Music Mountain.
Was that what it's called? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. When did you start doing national monument high points? Is it because you realized that a lot of them are like really fantastic rock formations or these structures that are basically begging you to climb them?
No, actually, I found that a lot of the national monuments are preserving either American Indian sites or historic sites. Here again, the definition of national monument sometimes gets stretched for what's included on the list. But out of the 212 national monuments that have been created over time, about 132 remain as national monuments, and they are managed by a wide variety of organizations: the Park Service, the United States Forest Service, BLM, all sorts of agencies, NOAA. There's a wide variety.
So there's a documentary that I watched a while ago. It's a Ken Burns documentary. It's called The National Park, America's Greatest Idea. And that's where they go through the history of how these places were discovered and how the agency was formed and the early days of the agency and everything. And they talked about the Grand Canyon, how that was first a national monument. And there was a lot of struggle politically to make that a national monument. And the president at the time used what's called the Antiquities Act, which allows the president to basically override Congress and establish a park or an area as
Yes.
a national monument. And I
Yes.
think that the designation is that it is a place of scientific interest, or at least that was the justification for the Grand Canyon. So, are some of these monuments then, does that definition, a place of scientific interest, does that still hold or is that changed?
I don't. Some of the recent national monuments that have been created by presidents seem to be more like historic,
Okay.
or honoring certain events in history, not necessarily scientific. So I'm not sure that
Yeah.
the definition is changing, like the definition of so many words.
Yeah.
And there were actually two national monuments in the Grand Canyon. There was Grand Canyon National Monument and Marble Canyon National Monument,
Okay.
which was added to the national park. Same thing with Zion National Park. It was two separate national monuments,
Oh, I didn't
and they
know
were
that.
both formed together to make the national park. Out of the 212 national monuments that were created, like 45 have been demoted. They're no longer a national monument. A lot of them are still protected by either local, city, or state.
Okay.
But naturally, I'm trying to pursue those too. Just like I've trying to pursue all the former state high points. Almost every state has a former state high point that I try to go visit. That's why I've gone to Grandfather Mountain and some other
Was that the
places.
former state high point of North Carolina?
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
yeah. At one time, what's really cool, and I like to see, I like to get verification, like publications. Old postcards are really cool.
Oh, okay. Cool. Where do you get those?
There's some guys in Ohio that go to the old postcard shows or flea markets where they have
Okay.
postcards. There's a couple guys in Ohio that are always looking out for me for old postcards of state high points or former state high points,
Cool.
and it's pretty cool. I mean, I've found four for Colorado, so
Wow.
that the postcard actually says Blanca, highest point of Colorado, or I don't know. It's just
That
so
is so
it's part
cool.
of, maybe it's me wishing to expand the list beyond 50 state high points, having more goals to reach. Same thing with national monuments, having more national monuments to go to than really exist. But for like, but for one reason or another, they were important. Like Thomas Edison's home and his laboratory in West Orange. Is it West Orange or East Orange, New Jersey? It's a cool site to go to because you realize the man did all those inventions inside these buildings, and
Wow.
it deserves national monument status to this day. But the local, it's changed its title.
So, what about monuments like Devil's Tower? Have you reached that high point?
No, I always thought I would. I've talked to climbing guides to help me get to the top, and I've thought about taking some brushing up on rock climbing skills and going out and practicing, and then climbing to the top. But I haven't done that. I haven't pulled the trigger on that. I guess I'm too busy trying to do other stuff to
Yeah.
devote so much time and effort into getting up to being proficient to do something like that.
I plan on going to visit that while I'm out at the convention, and I'm really excited. I think it's so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can walk through the forest, and you can walk up as steep as you can get,
Yeah.
and not without slipping, and to a point where you're looking straight up uh, at the rock formation. So it's pretty cool. I mean, it's
Oh,
fun.
cool.
It's
What
amazing.
about Mount Rushmore? Can you get to that high point?
If it was a national monument, yeah.
Oh, it's not?
What is it
What is it?
designated? I forget what the Park Service calls
Let me
it.
look at it.
No, Mount Rushmore National
Oh, National Memorial.
Historic Memorial,
Yeah, okay.
and yeah, behind it, I don't know if where the boundary of that is and how
Okay.
accessible it is, but I'm sure that some people have been there.
Yeah, well, and then Crazy
Yeah.
Horse is still under construction, I think.
Yes, yes, and that will probably stay in private hands. So
Oh,
it'll
really?
probably
I didn't know it was
never be a
private.
national monument. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. That's so exciting. So, before we close out, can you just go over some of the territorial high points that you've done as well?
Okay. Well, I've mentioned that 50 states and Washington D.C. So that's 51. You'd want Puerto Rico, which is all things considered, it's an easy high point to do. I was there on a 20-hour layover, so I rented a car, drove up, and then hiked up to the top, and got back to the airport in time. The U.S. Virgin Islands is another one, Crown Mountain. You can rent a car or have a cab driver take you to the top. Out in the Pacific Ocean, there's American Samoa, there, which is part of the highest point of American Samoa is also the national park, which is on a 99-year lease from the territory of American Samoa. It's the only national park that's not owned; it's leased.
Wow. Okay.
And then there's Guam. Guam is a territory, and the Northern Marianas is the territory. And that one was a Grihan, and it took several different efforts to get to the actual highest point. It took a long time and a lot of money to get to that high point. So all these territories, they're U.S. citizens. They have their own constitution, but they also borrow heavily from the United States Constitution, and they elect members of Congress that can vote on procedure but not on law. So they
Okay.
have their own they have their own form of government, similar to states, and they're U.S. citizens, and they're very proud of it, and they're more proud of their. As I travel, I learn this. They're more proud of their land that's designated territory than even like some of the states are proud of their
Yeah.
territories. It's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
What is next for you? What's the next list?
Well, I'm working on 6 lists in each state. I want to go to the highest point, which I've done, and the lowest point, which
Okay.
it's turning out to be quite an effort. A winery in every state, the oldest bar in every state, a cave in every state, and Kathy and I are golfing the highest golf course in every state. So not just a golf course, the highest golf course in every state. So there's a lot of people have golfed in every state, but
Yeah.
we want to go to the highest golf course.
Wow.
So that's a
That's
lot of
very
things.
ambitious.
Yeah,
That is so
yeah.
cool. Well,
It
love
is.
to have
It is.
love to have you back on the show to update me on that really long list.
Okay.
And the 2 questions
2
that I asked.
years. When I complete in 2 years.
Okay. The 2 questions that I close out every show with is how has the outdoors and high pointing enriched your life?
It it's enriched my life so much that it actually defines me. to my family and my friends, when I see them, they ask, "What mountain are you going to climb?" Or what land are you going to visit to climb? So it's enriched me to a point that it's actually helped define who I am. Of course, that's not all that defines who I am, but it's made me see so much more in the United States and so much more to do, as you can see from my goal of trying to do all these other things in the States that may not be completely High Point related, but they are related in the fact that visiting places and understanding them and relishing the location and what you find there. High pointing can be, peak bagging in general can be just ticking off the lists, where the end is important. The journey is not important, reaching the end goal. But I'm trying to expand on that and make the journey even more interesting by going to other different places. And that, in that way, it's completely changed the way I operate
That's fascinating.
and focus.
And the last question I like to ask guests is if you have any recommendations of books, podcasts, or documentaries that are outdoor adventure based that you would recommend to listeners. Of course, your book that will be in the show notes.
Yes. Yeah. Hiking Colorado Summits is a good guidebook.
Yep.
The National Park Guidebook, which never got written, that would have been a good one to buy, but we never ended up writing it. I have a lot of different guides to state high points, probably 11 different authors with guidebooks. One on motorcycles, one with families, one with his dog. All these guidebooks to state high points that I've collected over the years. Just looking for titles, different titles, because they give you different perspectives on the travel and understanding. There's so much information online that, as far as movies and that, movies now are more like entertainment, and there's some fun ones out there that involve high points. There's an interesting movie called The Man Who Went Up a Hill and Came Down a Mountain, because in England, hills that are at a certain level of height get all the attention and all the visitors. And the townsfolk wanted to make their hill higher, so they added rocks at the top so that it would achieve that level, so that visitors would come. It's just an interesting way of thinking about the tourism aspect or the draw of visiting places that have a certain height or a certain prominence or a certain meaning, and we give those peaks more honor than other peaks.
Yeah, we do.
It's an interesting way of thinking about it.
You're right. Well, this has been a really fun series of episodes, part 1 and part 2 here, that I know a lot of listeners are interested in, because as high pointers, we travel across the country. We try to see everything there is to see. We have lists. I know a lot of listeners and the guests go to national parks. And I've even heard a couple people say that they're trying to high point some of the national parks. So I appreciate your knowledge in this area and your expertise. And this has been a super fun conversation. Please keep in touch about all of your endeavors, and I'd love to have you back on again.
Will do. Will do. Thank you very much.